Hello beautiful people! Today we have the golden question of, is it wise to expose my image for the highlights or the shadows? Digital cameras struggle to compete with the dynamic range that filmed cameras can provide us, even in the year of 2016. What happens when our images lack dynamic range is that either our lighter parts of the image or the darker parts of our images lose a lot of detail to the point that we cannot recover them and therefore end up with a not so professional looking result. To address our golden question, is it wiser to expose for the highlights or for the shadows, I took two images with the same identical composition and the same exact focus point. Now, as you can see, one of the photos is exposed for the highlights, the sky, and the second image is exposed for the inside. Now, let's go ahead and open up the first image. We'll open up our shadows, maybe open up the exposure a little bit, and then drag down the highlights to preserve detail on the sky. Maybe we can open up the whites a little bit. Well, maybe you can actually open up the exposure a little bit more. I mean, you can play around with this to a great extent, but I think this looks fair right here, maybe a little bit more. All right, now let's go to the image that is exposed for the shadows and has lost detail in the highlights. If we go ahead and pull down our highlights and decrease the exposure, you can see that we can get back some detail on the outside. But if you compare both images, I think it's very clear that the image that was exposed for the highlights, look very carefully at the sky and at the buildings, that image was able to achieve a better dynamic range in the end. Keep in mind, this was just a quick job to show you guys which image has a better dynamic range and preserved more detail. I could go ahead and use adjustment brushes and perhaps graduated filters to pull out more of each image, but I think we can already see that the image that was exposed for the highlights was able to retain more detail. Now, another hint that the image exposed for the highlights was able to retain more detail is to look at the file sizes. The image that was exposed for the shadows has a file size of 38.9 megabytes. Whereas the image that was exposed for the highlights has a slightly bigger image size. So that means that this photo, whether it's good or bad information, was able to retain more information than this image. Now that we have the answer to our golden question, someone could go ahead and ask, does that mean that I have to always shoot for the highlights? And the answer to that question is absolutely not. You have to ask yourself what the priority of your photograph is. If you're taking an image of a landscape, then you may want to expose your image for the highlights to preserve most dynamic range because your viewer will be looking at the landscape as a whole. But what if you're taking a picture of a model? You may want to expose the image for the model's face and the model's skin to get the best detail out of the model. So it will entirely depend on what you're trying to go for, but bottom line is, if you expose for your highlights, you will end up with a better dynamic range. Thank you very much for watching my video. If you guys have any more questions, please let me know. And as of now, you guys have a great day. Take it easy.